Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Assistant Treasurer. Will the Assistant Treasurer update the House on the importance of the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement to jobs creation in Australia, particularly in the financial services sector, and are there any risks to this approach?
I call the Assistant Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank the member for Robertson for her question and acknowledge her deep commitment to jobs growth and free trade in this country. The China-Australia Free Trade Agreement is a landmark agreement which is in Australia's long-term economic interests. It's good for farmers, it's good for miners and it's good for people working in services. And in financial services is already nearly 10% of the Australian economy, employing nearly 400,000 people, and under the chapter, the rules around insurance, banking, wealth management, funds management will all be liberalised. No wonder there has been such strong support from the industry, with the Bankers Association, the Insurance Council, Equity Trustees, ANZ, Westpac all coming out strongly, and the Financial Services Council saying, and I quote, "This agreement is an outstanding achievement for Australia. It will create jobs and growth by allowing our industries to access the world's largest market." Now, Mr Speaker, I'm asked, are there any risks to this approach? Well, the greatest risk comes from those opposite and the Leader of the Opposition, because his reckless obstruction of the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement is like seeing him sitting on his dinghy against an armada of support, which includes former Labor Prime Ministers, Labor State Premiers and, of course, a former President of the ACTU. But there is one question we have to ask in this House. The question is, when did the Leader of the Opposition start to oppose the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement? When was it? Was it A, in 2015, when the agreement was signed?
Member for Lawler.
Was it B, in 2014, when the agreement, after nearly 10 years of negotiation, was concluded?
The member
or was
for Lawler.
it C, before negotiations even began, when he was leader of the union movement? Now, Mr Speaker, it was, you can guess it, it was C, because this is what happened in 2005, February the 7th, nearly 3 months before negotiations even began. The Leader of the Opposition was the head of the AWU, and he said to a national conference, and I quote, "Another major challenge before us is a possible FTA with China. We remain to be convinced that any such deal with China could be in the national interest." Mr Speaker, the agreement hadn't even begun negotiations. You hadn't even been released, and you were already against it. Mr Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition was doing the bidding of the unions then. He's doing the bidding of the unions now. He was railing against an agreement that hadn't even started negotiations, let it be seen. As Leader of the Opposition, his job is to act in the national interest, and the national interest means getting out of the way and letting the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement become law.
The Prime Minister.